It's the biggest thing from Japan since the Power Rangers. Pokémon is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the movie makes its debut nationwide tomorrow.
So far this year, sales of trading cards, toys, and video games surpassed $500 million in the U.S.
Pokémon is an undeniable obsession with children across the country.
Pokémon is now in full mania.
On February 27, 1996, Pokémon Red and Green versions for the Nintendo Game Boy were released exclusively to Japanese audiences. The ambitious role-playing games about catching, battling, and trading over 100 original monsters became a surprise success amongst young audiences, and by the end of the year, the combined titles had sold over 1 million copies. The popularity of the games subsequently led to the franchise branching out into new mediums, most notably the official Pokémon trading card game and the animated TV series, which found similar runaway success and further cemented Pokémon's place in Japanese pop culture. In 1998, Pokémon began to be introduced to audiences outside of Japan, arriving not just as games, but as a fully formed multimedia franchise backed by a coordinated promotional campaign set on recreating the original Japanese Pokémon craze in other parts of the world. This effort paid off, and at the turn of the millennia, Pokémon had become a fully fledged global phenomenon, grossing billions in revenue and establishing itself as a cornerstone of children's media.
Can probably guarantee you there's another year and a half to this craze. It hasn't even peaked yet.
However, this exponential pattern of growth leveled off in 2000, slowed substantially in 2001, and was replaced by declining sales in 2002. The phenomenon that had so thoroughly captured the hearts and minds of children across the world had begun to fade. Children who formed the basis of the initial phenomenon had begun to grow up, and many of them were no longer interested in Pokémon. The decline was such that observers at the time believed that one of the most successful media franchises in history would begin to collapse on itself. Educational anthropologist Joseph Tobin speculated in his contemporary book, Pikachu's Global Adventure, that the franchise would soon undergo radical shifts as its audience continued to dwindle. Pokémon living on as a Nintendo computer game does not necessarily mean that it will live on much longer as a Saturday morning TV show, nor that there will be more successful movies, nor that sales of Pokémon merchandise will not continue to drop off each year. Pokémon's declining popularity shows the fragility of a corporation's control over its customers. Children may be prone to consumer crazes, but they choose which crazes, and they decide when a craze is over. For all the talk of Pokémon's decline, the series is still thriving decades later. While Pokémon did experience a lull in the early 2000s, it never truly faded from public consciousness, and in more recent years has only reasserted itself as the world's #1 media franchise. Tobin's dire assessment of Pokémon's future ultimately proved incorrect, in part because he, like most people of the time, assumed kids would grow out of Pokémon and leave the series behind. But what we can observe in our time is that a significant portion of Pokémon's audience aren't children, but adults.
Take that, inferior 27-year-old man!
Now, the fact that a piece of media intended for a younger demographic has a large and dedicated base of older fans is hardly novel or unique to Pokémon. Many media properties are designed to appeal to all ages while focusing on children as their target audience. Nonetheless, Pokémon has a significant base of adult fans, many of whom grew up with the series, have watched it change for better or worse, and may have complicated feelings towards Pokémon as it is now. This presents an opportunity to explore a critical question. How do fans and fandoms evolve with their fandom object? Now, since Pokémon is a massive multimedia franchise, we'd be here forever if I tried to break it down in its entirety. For the purposes of narrowing the focus of this discussion, we'll be looking exclusively at the mainline series of Pokémon video games and their respective fandom. The mainline series of Pokémon games have recently been the center of controversy amongst longtime fans. While sales have still been great and critical reviews have been favorable, many Pokémon fans have expressed distaste for the newer entries in the series, most notably the 8th generation titles Pokémon Sword and Shield, released for the Nintendo Switch in late 2019. While initially highly anticipated as Pokémon's jump from handheld to console, Sword and Shield quickly drew the ire of fans when it was announced that, for the first time in the series' history, the games would not include every Pokémon introduced up until that point. with the producers citing technical limitations and a desire to focus on polishing other elements of the game with the time that they had. Criticisms of Sword and Shield continue to amass over time, with players complaining about the difficulty, graphics, and story to the point that the games have become black sheeps among the fandom. Notably, this reflected growing sentiments that more modern Pokémon games, usually defined as the 3D games and onward, have seen a drastic decline in quality compared to the older titles, that the series refuses to evolve beyond how it started, and that the developers don't care, are terrible at their job, or are simply lazy when it comes to putting these products out there. The validity of these criticisms isn't really my focus, in part because this sort of discourse is inevitable. More so than any individual complaints, I'm more interested in the general narrative that Pokémon is objectively worse now than it was before. There's an observable subset of Pokémon fans that grew up with the series and are adamant that Pokémon has lost something with its newer releases, while holding up the older entries as a gold standard. What these fans are tapping into is a core part of any long-running fandom: nostalgia. In order to understand how fandoms evolve, it's important that we first understand how fandoms reflect on themselves, how they contextualize their past in order to inform their present and how they'll continue into the future. So, let's talk about nostalgia. Nostalgia, from nostos, return home, and algia, longing, is a longing for a home that no longer exists or has never existed. Nostalgia is a sentiment of loss and displacement, but it is also a romance with one's own fantasy. Nostalgia itself has a utopian dimension, only it is no longer directed towards the future. Sometimes nostalgia is not directed towards the past either, but rather sideways. The nostalgic feels stifled within the conventional confines of time and space. Everyone has a capacity for nostalgia. The places we visit, the movies we watch, the games we play, all have the potential to imprint themselves on our hearts, color the way we view the world, and shape the kind of people we become. This is especially true within fandoms, as the warm feelings of nostalgia people have for a particular media object are often a motivating factor to becoming fans. Engaging in fandom activities enables fans to reassert their connection to their fandom object, and potentially indulge in the happy glow of nostalgic experiences. For many fans, their fandom experience goes beyond a simple, enjoyable activity, but becomes part of how they conceptualize themselves and the world around them. As media scholar Dr. William Proctor describes, for some fans, performing fandom is not simply a routinized, fun-filled extravaganza, but intrinsically bound to personal contexts, to everyday realities and trajectories of the self. For these fans, their fandom is so much more than frivolous, disposable entertainment. It is, quite simply, one of the most important cultural texts of their lives, and a discursive foundation in the architecture of self-narrative. Fans' sense of self-identity is so firmly enmeshed with the fan object of choice that they may lionize the primary text to such an extent that potential threats to textual authenticity can become sites of intense negotiation and defensive bulwarking. Fans with particularly strong nostalgic attachments to a specific media object may feel defensive when said object is threatened by new developments. New entries in a beloved series need to contend with not only fans' critical expectations for what features and values need to be upheld, but also their deep-seated nostalgia for the original material that the new changes threaten to undermine. This phenomenon frequently occurs with many long-running media franchises, but is especially noticeable with Pokémon since a significant portion of its audience are the children who grew up with Pokémon and continue to engage with it as adults. Childhood nostalgia is notoriously strong, and complicating matters further is the often noted fact that while Pokémon's fans grow up and mature, Pokémon itself doesn't. While the franchise quite frequently makes content designed to appeal to its longtime fans, Pokémon's core audience has always been children, which reflects in its games. This means that for many fans, their earliest, most nostalgic memories of Pokémon are from a time and frame of mind they can never reclaim, and can never be replicated by any new installments going forward. For those who incorporated their fandom as a core pillar of their self-identity, watching it become more and more alien with the passing of time can be a painful experience. This can lead some fans to become disillusioned and critical of their series as they grow older, holding new developments to the unfair standard of their most nostalgic memories. In that sense, it's entirely predictable that Pokemon's modern release has become the subject of derision and outright hate from many fans. To be abundantly clear, this isn't meant to be a blanket dismissal of criticism toward newer Pokemon entries. There are issues and choices in modern Pokemon games that are worth discussion, especially since the series has been changing. Newer entries have been increasingly experimental, exploring new mechanics, making fundamental changes to parts of the core formula, and even employing different development teams. There are bound to be growing pains as the series evolves, and consequently, important examinations of where these games fall short and how they compare to the originals. Even critiques born from a nostalgic lens can be perfectly valid, and in fact, such viewpoints offer unique perspectives that a less emotionally invested eye may overlook. But unchecked nostalgia can be blinding and even destructive. A refusal to engage with anything that fails to live up to an idealized world. That this utopian past may only exist in one's mind hardly matters, as the nostalgic's emotions may guide them to bind the world according to their own vision. Of course, while there is a certain universality regarding our capacity to experience these feelings, there are as many unique fandom experiences as there are fans. For some Pokemon fans who grew up with the series, they may be currently in the midst of reconciling how Pokemon means something different to them now than it did before, while others already decided that the series isn't for them anymore and simply moved on. Others still continue to enjoy Pokemon just as they have for all these years. While fandoms are bound together by their shared experiences, each fan brings their own history, values, needs, and nostalgia to the table, and these differences can sometimes obscure the commonality that fans share. Nostalgia is paradoxical in the sense that longing can make us more empathetic toward fellow humans, yet the moment we try to repair longing with belonging, the apprehension of loss with a rediscovery of identity, we often part ways and put an end to mutual understanding. Alja, longing, is what we share, yet nostos, the return home, is what divides us. It is a promise to rebuild the ideal home that lies at the core of many powerful ideologies of today, tempting us to relinquish critical thinking for emotional bonding. The danger of nostalgia is that it tends to confuse the actual home and the imaginary one. In extreme cases, it can create a fandom homeland, for the sake of which one is ready to die or kill. Unreflected nostalgia breeds monsters, yet the sentiment itself, the mourning of displacement and temporal irreversibility, is at the very core of the modern condition. In late 2010, artist Nick Franco published a webcomic of his playthrough of Pokemon Ruby using a set of self-imposed rules. He could only capture the first Pokemon he encountered in each new area, and if a Pokemon fainted, he would consider it dead and release it. As Franco described it, the results were unexpected. Rather than simply increasing the difficulty, these rules caused him to care for his monster companions more than ever before. He found new appreciation for Pokemon he would have previously never bothered to capture, and he worried deeply for his team, knowing any knockout would mean goodbye. The premise of the challenge spread amongst the Pokemon community, and since then, Nuzlocke runs, named after the comic's Nuzleaf who is frequently drawn at the face of John Locke from Lost, have become a very popular way of playing Pokemon games. For many Pokemon fans, Nuzlocke runs fulfill certain needs that make experiencing Pokemon games much more enjoyable, such as increased difficulty, novelty, and the creation of personalized narratives. The existence of Nuzlockes and their widespread popularity are but one of many examples of the transformative works fans may engage in to adapt their fandom object to suit their own needs and interests. For fans who still hold Pokemon close to their hearts but find it harder to enjoy as much as they once did, these sorts of variations on how they play the games offer them new avenues to re-experience their fandom. As fandom scholar Henry Jenkins describes, the nature of fan creation challenges the media industry's claims to hold copyrights on popular narratives. Media texts, thus, can and must be remade by their viewers so that potentially significant materials can better speak to the audience's cultural interests and more fully address their desires. I highlight Nuzlocke because of their popularity in core reimagining of Pokemon playthroughs, but of equal importance is the fact that the number of ways Pokemon fans rework how they play Pokemon is numerous. To name a handful, Twitch Plays Pokemon was a crowdsourced event where over 1 million participants tried to complete a Pokemon game while inputting controls simultaneously through Twitch chat, creating a fascinating chaos that became the source of a number of memes and folklore.
The great gibbering voices of the old world must return to inhabit the body of a 10-year-old child and return Lord Helix's dominion to this land.
The competitive Pokemon community has created forums like Smogon University dedicated to competitive level of play, including both official formats and a multitude of fan-made ones to suit a wide variety of players. To this end, entire online simulators such as Pokemon Showdown were created by fans to make competitive battling more accessible to the masses. Pokemon players engage in all sorts of challenge runs beyond simple Nuzlocke, such as limiting the types of Pokemon one can use, adding additional conditions to a Nuzlocke premise, or competing with other players to accomplish a set criteria.
We've raised the shiny odds in Pokemon Fire Red to 1 in 100. Whenever any of us finds a shiny Pokemon, we have to restart our game.
The first person to beat Brock and then make it back down to Professor Oak wins.
And, of course, there are plenty of fan games out there made by those who want to put their own spin on the traditional Pokemon formula, oftentimes featuring elements like higher difficulty and darker storylines that fans won't find in the official games.
Did she just use Fire Blast on a human?
What we see here are glimpses into how Pokemon fans can reimagine their fandom experience. It's a development of new traditions, new culture for an older fandom object, one informed by nostalgia but not confined by it. Of course, this is only a brief look into the Pokemon fandom through the lens of fans who primarily engage with Pokemon through the core games. As an expansive multimedia franchise, Pokemon is much larger than just a series of games. And likewise, there are countless ways that fans can continue to experience Pokemon even without the games themselves. Fans of the games may go on to watch the TV show, play the trading card game, consume or even make original fan content, and engage with other fans and take part in the overarching discourse. It should go without saying, but there's no shortage of modes for fanish activities beyond the original fandom object. And this opens up new avenues for fans to pursue if they want to expand their horizons within the same space of fandom. It's crucial to note that fans would not be so eager to engage in these sorts of activities if they did not hold the original fandom object in high regard. Pokémon is beloved, and its fans clearly want to be able to continue to enjoy it in ways both familiar and new. That Pokémon has managed to maintain its massive audience for years speaks not only to the universal appeal of Pokémon, but also to the willingness of its longtime fans to evolve with the series, to identify what's dear to them and learn how they can keep it relevant in their lives. Nostalgia is not always about the past. It can be retrospective, but also prospective. Fantasies of the past determined by the needs of the present have a direct impact on realities of the future. Consideration of the future makes us take responsibility for our nostalgic tales. Just as media is prone to change with time, so too do fandoms. Some fans may struggle to adapt to changes to their beloved works, and cling to nostalgic ideals of how things should be, while others may accept the truth of change and renegotiate how they experience their fandom on their own terms. Others still might have no difficulty enjoying their fandom as they always have, while still others may grow past their fandom and close that chapter of their lives. And while these fans continue to grow and change, there will always be new fans bringing new ideas, perspectives, and life into fandom. The end result is an ever-fluctuating and ever-evolving collection of people bound together not by any singular text, but by their celebration of what their fandom means to them. To bring this all to a conclusion, Pokémon likely isn't going anywhere anytime soon, despite claims to the contrary dating all the way back to the franchise's earliest days. And I think what we're seeing now, with releases like Pokémon Legends Arceus and the upcoming open-world Scarlet and Violet, is a series that wants to explore new ideas and opportunities. It may struggle as it tries to cling to its familiar roots, but there's an observable effort to pursue growth, to try and evolve into something new. Likewise, I think fans have something to learn from this too. Change may be difficult, and even scary, but one beautiful thing about nostalgia is that it need not be rooted in the distant past. Every day, we experience new things and form new memories that we'll look back on with fondness, so it might be worthwhile to venture out on a new journey every now and then. I'm sure that along the way you'll discover many things, perhaps even something about yourself.